Hello. Today I'd like to share with you a PowerPoint presentation based on my World War II Today topic, the nature of the Anglo-American alliance. One of the questions that I've always found interesting is what motivated the relationship? And I think we all recognize that it was the invasion of Poland by Nazi Germany created a situation of national survival. It's, I think, important to take a look at another question, which is, was there always a special relationship between the two nations? Throughout much of its history, the relationship between the United States and Great Britain was contentious. For most of its history, the United States wanted to be free from European entanglements. What changed? A global emergency that shocked the world. And that was the rapid advance of the German military in 1940. And again, for emphasis, I think it's important that we say that it shocked the world. From December 1940 through December 1941, the U.S. moved towards unlimited support for Great Britain. By the spring and summer of 1940, Americans were in favor of material aid for Britain. Americans still wanted to stay out of the war, but they were agreeable to Lend-Lease agreements. Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union would find themselves as unlikely allies against the Nazi threat. Again, our global emergency. So contrary to Winston Churchill's assertion, the Anglo-American alliance was not based on a special relationship, but it was a necessary collaboration characterized by a power dynamic that was in constant flux. We always have to keep in mind that historically it was a troubled relationship. Relations between the United States and Britain were very rarely warm. There were conflicts over trade, national boundaries, and neutrality rights that culminated in the War of 1812. The War of 1812 influenced the relationships between the two countries for most of the 19th century. A special relationship, it was never inevitable. America wanted no part in another European war. They actually believed that World War I had been a mistake, and our entrance into it was based on British manipulation. The United States passed neutrality acts in the late 1930s to reinforce the desire of Americans to avoid conflict in Europe. It was a necessary alliance. The US and Britain were forced to work together to fight common enemies. There were disagreements on wartime strategies. Britain preferred a war on the periphery that would close the ring on Nazi Germany. The US favored a more direct approach that was designed to destroy the enemy's ability to resist. Stalin favored the American position to opening a second front in Europe on the continent as soon as was possible. There were early fissures in the alliance. Churchill felt compelled to protect special trade agreements that existed between Britain and its colonies and dominions. The right of self-determination and self-government did not apply to British colonial possessions in Churchill's interpretation of the Atlantic Charter. So I use this flag sometimes for points that I really want to emphasize. Before the United States was brought into the conflict, an Anglo-American alliance was not inevitable. From its founding, relations between the United States and Britain had a legacy of hostility. There never had been a special relationship. Again, Britain favored a war around the periphery. The Allies would close the ring around Germany, and they would avoid a direct contact in Europe. The United States wanted a direct attack on the European continent as soon as was possible. Stalin made demands for a second front as soon as it could be done. Churchill disagreed with Roosevelt and Stalin over the need for a cross-channel invasion. And Churchill was not above backdoor diplomacy. As the war progressed, Churchill saw the need to make himself useful to Stalin. And the result were what are known as the percentage agreements. And they were agreed upon at the Moscow Conference. It divided Europe into two spheres of influence that gave Britain and the Soviets control over their self-interests. As the war began to reach a conclusion, the alliance began to crumble. We have to remember that it only existed to defeat the Axis powers. There was major controversy over the fate of Poland. Poland was almost completely under Soviet control, and the Red Army was 45 miles from Berlin. Roosevelt needed to bring the Soviet Union into the Far Eastern War. This was not a strong negotiating position for the United States or Britain. And anywhere the Soviet army moved, agreements were broken, resulting in the installation of communist governments in places like Romania and Poland. As the war began to reach a conclusion, the alliance crumbled. Remember, it only existed to defeat the Axis powers. U.S. behavior from 1944 through 1945 did not provide evidence of a desire to maintain an alliance. The U.S. didn't want to maintain the combined chiefs of staff. They terminated Lend-Lease agreements in August 1945, knowing that the British depended on them. And the United States ceased in sharing atomic information. Again, what changed? Churchill evoked what he referred to in Fulton, Missouri as a special relationship that existed between the United States and Britain. And Churchill also evoked images of the Soviet Iron Curtain. Curiously enough, the concept of the Iron Curtain was originally developed by Goebbels. It was the Cold War that motivated the continuation of an alliance. We have to remember the original alliance, it was motivated by a fear of the Axis powers. The U.S. only agreed to an alliance when Soviet-American tensions increased after 1945. Churchill reaffirmed the need for an alliance that was posed by Soviet aggression. By 1947, the U.S. was convinced that Russian aggression was unceasing and attempting to subjugate Turkey, Greece, and much of the Mediterranean. The result was the formation of the Truman Doctrine. America would fight communism everywhere and provide military and economic aid to vulnerable nations. The Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan formally ended American isolationism. By this point, it was clear that the United States and Great Britain were heeding Churchill's call for a continuation of the wartime alliance in the face of Soviet aggression. Still, just a quick reminder here that a special relationship was never an inevitable thing. Throughout our history, it was more natural for us to be in a contentious relationship with Great Britain. The Anglo-American alliance was only a pragmatic response to Soviet aggression. It offered the best means to protect their respective national interests. Churchill's call for a continuation of the Anglo-American alliance called for a combined American and British front against an aggressive Soviet nation bent on global domination. Churchill placed his greatest hopes in the United States. Attempts to characterize this relationship as special are based on a sentimental myth of common values and languages. And again, this is a flag that I used to reinforce a really important takeaway. The Anglo-American alliance was not based on a special relationship, but was a relationship of convenience, necessity, and a power dynamic that was in constant flux.